Hi everybody, it's Josh with Talk About Trek, and we're back again tonight because we are going to talk about TNG number 40, Possession, by JM Dillard and Kathleen O'Malley. Now, I finished this book up actually 2 nights ago on the 22nd of July, but yesterday we had a big old trip to the amusement park and of course had no time to make a video then. We'll talk more about that later. And then I wanted to do it earlier today, but kind of ran out of time. So here we are now. We're a couple days removed from the reading. So I have kind of, it's faded somewhat from my mind, but not completely. So I think that we can sit down and have a thorough discussion here of this very, I guess maybe one of the darker TNG books that I've read in a lot of ways. So let's just get right into the cover here. Alien entities infect the minds of Picard and his crew. Star Trek Possession. And there on the cover, of course, you've got Counselor Troi looking perturbed, Worf looking stoic, and a Ferengi marauder. So that's what the information you're given there. Now, from the back. 80 years ago, bodiless entities brought a plague of violence and bloodshed to the planet Vulcan. The nightmare only ended when the entities were trapped inside special containers. Now, on the eve of the galaxy-scale scientific exposition, the containers have been opened, freeing the malevolent entities to possess the minds and bodies of all they encounter, including the crew of the Starship Enterprise. Whoa. Friends turn into foes, and no one can be trusted, as Captain Picard faces a deadly and insidious threat. Unless the entities can be stopped once more, they will spread their madness throughout the entire Federation, which is their goal, to spread their madness. So, this book is a sequel, and I had no idea going in this was a sequel, but J.M. Dillard wrote a TOS book called Demons, which I unfortunately do not have up on the shelf. Otherwise, I probably would have read it directly after this. But in reading this at first, I did not know that. But then when they get into the book a little bit, they start dropping kind of like a hint about, oh, this happened to a ship 80 years ago, you know? So, like, it was, that was kind of cool that, I guess it was a sequel, but I didn't know it was a sequel. And now I want to read the prequel, basically, which is what it would be for me. So, again, it's a very kind of a dark Trek book. Not too dark, but it has quite a bit more, I don't know, murder than I'm used to in the rest of the series. And I guess just because of the way that these entities are, they basically are entities that will feed off of hate, feed off of fear, feed off of rage. So because of that, like, they have to do these horrible things to feed, and it leads to some pretty messed up stuff happening aboard the Enterprise. And really, it's hard to say who really gets the focus in this book, because it's more of a focus, I guess, on the story than any one particular character in the story. I guess Worf and Counselor Troi do play like the biggest part in the book, which is of course why they're featured. The Ferengis are in the beginning. They're featured in the beginning, but then they don't play into the whole rest of the story as well. So they didn't feature too much into the plot. They were just kind of like they set the plot in motion, basically. The Enterprise, as it said on the back, is delivering scientists to this gathering of scientists, this techno fair. So that's the kind of the setup of the plot. They have all these various different scientists, and as the scientists are traveling to the techno fair, they are setting up their kind of displays and just, showing the other scientists what they do. So they have 10 Forward kind of cleared out, and Guinan is, they've removed her from the story. She is off at a bartenders convention or something like that, which she told Picard was some kind of religious retreat. So they removed her, and just so they could have 10 Forward kind of as this whole different area set up with all these different science things going on. So that's the gist of the story. So, and the story gets, like I said, it gets fairly dark because as it proceeds, and one of the great things about the way that this book is written is that the way it's written, it almost kind of like tricks the reader into, like, you don't really know what's going on. You don't know which one of these people is actually possessed, if what they're recollecting in the story is what actually happened, or if it's what, like, these entities are making them think that what happened, you know. So there's a lot of very interesting stuff there, and it's just interesting too, I guess, to see, and it's played out a couple times in episodes, to see our favorite characters kind of taken over and showing this different side. And you got a lot of that here. So it features a little bit of Alexander and Worf and this scientist, Dr. Danilkin, I believe her name was. And so that's kind of like a little focus there, which is kind of nice. It's a focus on Worf and, you know, his family and his, I don't know, his kind of getting a relationship or starting a relationship with her. So it's a little bit of an interesting story there. And what else? Let's see. Oh, man. In the end, it really, really picks up with some very interesting stuff with Picard as well, when he is forced to face and fight off these entities. And that was one of the big kind of really cool points in the book that I enjoyed. So, I don't know. All in all, I guess without going into too much spoilers, again, it's not a lighthearted Trek book. It is dark, and it does kind of go into some, you know, some darker stuff you don't normally see, some brutal things there. But it is very, 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 very interesting, and also how that they, like I said, how the author writes the, like the possessed people, you know, and like seeing the things from their perspective. It is very well done. So I really liked it for that, and just a very cool story all in all. So I'm happy to have read it. And now that we've reached number 40, I kind of feel that I can step back from the TNG numbered series for a moment, kind of take a break, and maybe talk about some other things in the future. So I am going to be eager to get back into the numbered series so I can get into Invasion and, so many good things down the road. But we're going to stop at 40 for a moment, and we will take a Trek break. But next for me will actually be Stephen King's Wizard and Glass, and that's a pretty thick one. So we're going to dive into that next. But let's talk a little bit more about possession and what we really, I guess, like kind of like the key moments, I think, in the book, and just get like a little bit more spoiler about it. So the book starts out with a young scientist, or a young Vulcan who grows to be a scientist, Skell. And he is basically, it's this time period now where the Vulcans have been infected by this madness. So you get to see the oh my god, I can't say it. You get to see Skell basically see his father viciously attack and murder his mother, and his mother, kind of in her last act, screams at him to run, and mentally screams at him to run, which causes him to be able to get away. And so that's how the book starts. Again, very dark, you know, with this child witnessing his father and this Vulcan, and he, like, sadistically grinning as well, which is, like, you know, crazy, something you don't picture. So then it kind of fast forwards to Skell grown up, and now he is Master Scientist Skell, and he is in charge of keeping these artifacts safe and under wraps. And that it has been his job for the past 80 years is to watch over these things and try to also learn as much about them as they can. He was one of, like, the only survivors of the plague that affected everybody back then. So there, when he's down on the planet, he is kidnapped by, turns out to be two Ferengi businessmen, I guess, who are kind of caught on to that he's doing something, and they want a part of it. So they've beamed him aboard, and they've beamed his two containers aboard. And these two containers they kind of describe as looking like black clamshells, very like non-assuming, but if opened, then these entities or whatever could be released. So this part on the Ferengi vessel is very well done because it's written from the point where like you don't know who's infected, you don't know who is actually crazy. Did the Ferengi get it? Because at one point, like they show these things opening. They have like a struggle for the devices and the phaser between Skell and the Ferengi. They end up getting stunned by the other Ferengi, and then there's this kind of like chase through the ship, and you don't really know what's real and what isn't. Like, eventually it comes back around. The other Ferengi has been brutally murdered, and then the last Ferengi and Skell have kind of like confronted each other, and again, you don't know at that point if the Ferengi has the entities in them, if Skell has the entities in them, but they're kind of now trying to lean maybe like the Ferengi does. But then that's why I think when the Enterprise shows up and they are able to beam Skell and the artifacts into quarantine, and that's when the Ferengi does something kind of strange where he realizes like what these things are, and to keep from like them spreading anymore, he destroys his own ship in the process. So the Ferengis are gone, removed from the story now, but they've kind of advanced the plot and got it to this point. But now Skell is on board the Enterprise with these things, and now he begins to kind of enact his master plan. And it's at this, well, maybe not at this point, but it's kind of revealed that basically the entities have always been within Skell, even since he was a kid, kind of residing, biding their time, learning and growing, so that they could one day enact a plan, which is what they are doing now. So they have this kind of master plan to slowly infect the Enterprise crew, and then infect the Technofair that they're going to, and then through the Technofair, they could spread their hate-filled entity violence throughout the whole universe, right? So that's their evil plan, and they begin to enact it by slowly infecting different members. They start with like a different scientist, and then Skell infects his ensign, who's his kind of liaison officer to help him. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to touch someone, and you have to look them in the eyes, and that's like the pathway the entities can travel on. So they begin to infect the ship. And of course, they are eager to get at this scientist, Dr. Danilkin. So she plays kind of one of the bigger guest starring roles in the book, too. She takes a shine to Worf and Alexander, and the other scientists, the ones possessed by the entity and all them, they want to get her into the possession group, too. But when they send the entity to attack her, she's able to fight them off because she knows, like, she's been practiced in self-defense and all sorts of things. So she fights off the entity, escapes in time, or the infected person escapes in time, and is able to then kind of seek protection from Worf. So, but she did major damage to this, the person, the entity, and this was the liaison officer, Barbara something. But anyway, this is when like the book starts to get kind of dark because like she's injured and hurting, and that's like what feeds the entities. So she goes and kind of hides in this cabinet, and then the other infected people all come to see her, and while she's sitting there like moaning and groaning in pain, they're all just kind of like feeding their entities off of her while they're trying to like get strength and get stronger so they can recruit more people and just grow and grow and grow, right? So that's the major plan that they're working on, and it's going really good so far. At this point, they've managed to get Commander Riker. They've managed to get, I think they say something like 25% of the crew, including Geordi LaForge. They tried to infect Worf, but something about his physiology doesn't work. Of course, they can't infect Data. So that's kind of how it comes to the end. So at first, though, they do try a plan. When they kind of realize what's going on, they enact a plan to gas everybody on the ship. knock everybody out for 4 hours. That would give enough time for all the entities to kind of starve out and die. So they enact this plan, and like everything seems to be working. It's kind of like too good to be true, you know. And of course, it didn't actually work. Um, I'm kind of skipping out on Deanna's part in this too because it was good, but she was mostly knocked out for the whole thing because her reaction to these things was too extreme, and they had to kind of put her under. So she was under for most of it, which was to the entity's benefit because she would be the only one who could tell really who was possessed and who wasn't possessed. So they keep her knocked out because Dr. Crusher is also one of the infected. So it's an interesting book because you have Geordi, Riker, and Crusher all working against everyone else, you know, to spread this infection to the rest of the ship. And they eventually, after the plan to get rid of them fails, Riker gets to Picard. But man, this is one of the cooler parts too in the book because Picard, first off, fights off Riker with such force. But he does get infected, but then he's able to fight off the infection. And he fights it off long enough, and he kind of tricks the other infected people to think that he's infected. But he is fighting it off because he doesn't want to be taken over again, you know, like he was done before when he was taken over by the Borg. So he's fighting off the infection himself, and he's able to fight it off long enough to get to Data and kind of get Data the master plan of what they need to do. And this is where the end of the book gets kind of funny. It's almost like a cross between like a zombie movie and like Ghostbusters or something. Because at the end, of course, Picard gets to Data and he has Data lock him in the brig and basically seal it so that nobody can get him out. So he is stuck in there. So the entities couldn't use him to their advantage to take over more ships and more people. So he's locked up in there, and now Worf with Dr. Danielkin and Alexander and the newly awakened Counselor Troy have to meet up and find Data, which they're able to do with Alexander's help. And then they all work together to figure out a solution to first find the infected people and then somehow get the infection out of them. And that's where it kind of becomes like a Ghostbusters part. They come up with this way to do it with the doctor's help. To every one of them has like a visor, which is there because of the Techno Fair. They're like one of the inventor of the visor was there. But they attach these visors through these different things that they're able to use to then, when the entities try to transfer in between, instead of getting into their brains, they get sucked into the ghost trap box, basically, and they get captured, and safely they can be disposed of. So that's what happens. They all kind of get these things on, they all get their visors on, and they all go to work to get the rest of the crew free and clear, you know. And in the end, they end up in like one of the big shuttle bays, and it's at this point where the remaining infected crew have become almost like zombie-like in their kind of search for like pain. So they're using Counselor Troy to kind of send out a message, and then all of them will come like zombies to go in there, and then they trap them into force fields, and they kind of let them out a little bit at a time, and then they suck the entities out of their head. So it's a cool ending. Like it's very, very different, you know, and just like it, and I just totally reminded me of like something you've seen on like The Walking Dead when they're like herding a bunch of zombies together so they could kill them or something like that. It was the same idea. They were kind of herding them all together, letting them out a little bit at a time so that they could suck the entities out of their head with their ghost trap visors. So very cool. It's also revealed in the end that Skell's mother, as she was dying, sent her Katra into Skell. And that is kind of like throughout the book, there's just been this theme of like a person's mother in their head warning them of danger, warning them to run. Like when Troy first gets too close to the entities, when Picard starts to sense things, all of them hear like this voice of their mother in their head, and it's actually just Skell's mother coming to them all like through his Katra to kind of help save the day in the end, kind of give the warnings in time. So yeah, very cool. So in the end, it was Data along with Geordi or Worf, Alexander, and the Good Doctor, and they were all kind of working together to flush out the zombies and then suck the entities out of their brain. Very good stuff. Data has some great moments where he's outwitting Geordi as they're kind of like working back and forth against each other. So just really good stuff. All in all, a fun book, and I'm glad to have spent the last 20 minutes talking about it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Star Trek TNG Possession. Yeah, we're gonna move on to something else now. Thank you so much for watching. As always, live long and prosper, and we will see everybody in the next video. Goodbye.